Hey there folks, and welcome back to another one of my patented list videos. This time on my top underrated Gamecube games. I'll admit, as much as I was looking forward to covering some games on this system, it was a bit of a challenge to put together since it wasn't a terribly popular system in general, and even a few of the top selling games on the system sold poorly for their series and were generally forgotten. But that meant I had to actually struggle to narrow it down to only 14 games, and even then the list is contingent on ones I've actually played, so I have to apologize in advance for some notable absences I already know will make people mad. But don't worry, I think for the most part, I've got a handle on this system. I love puns, okay? I make no apologies for who I am. But, whatever, on with the list. Everyone's a critic. What's this, another list with a sports game on it? Call me predictable, but this game is great, if not a little basic. I'll admit, I'm a much bigger fan of this game's sequel, but it's on the Wii, so I couldn't include it. But that one can actually get a bit too hectic and rage-inducing, whereas this is a more traditional arcade-type experience with some Mario flair. Essentially, you pick a team captain from a predictable group of famous Mario characters, and then a supporting character that fills out the rest of the team. From what I can tell, they're all the same, so it's really just a matter of preference. The match itself is 5-on-5, and in single player the control just shifts to whoever has the ball, while in multiplayer you can actually have the different human players either on opposing teams or on the same team controlling some of those side characters. The gameplay itself, it's soccer. Or football for you non-Americans. The main difference, aside from all the Mario branding, is the inclusion of some traditional items such as shells and bananas, and a strange electrified wall surrounding the field, forcing all the players to continue playing until either one team wins, or they all get fried to a crisp, I assume. I don't know what sick game they're playing, and frankly, I don't want to think about it too hard. But I'll admit, it is pretty satisfying to bash all of the opponents into the wall and run off with the ball as they convulse and probably pee their athletic gear. Another fun inclusion is a unique super attack for each character, activated with a very specific timing on a charge shot, which nets the team double points. Heh, nets. That one wasn't even intentional. I love puns. Also, for all you boys out there that love swooning over Peach, let's just say this game is probably for you. Plus, I can never get enough of Waluigi. He's always so ridiculously animated, it never gets old. Okay, so while I couldn't resist the number joke here, I also struggled a bit with this game when replaying it for this list. It's great, don't get me wrong, and definitely deserving of this list, as it's one that barely anyone played even though it has a unique style unmatched by most games, but it feels like a very dated shooter by today's standards. For example, you move with the control stick and aim with the C-stick, which was pretty standard by that point. But the C-stick was a bit loose, and there was no more accurate aiming reticle option like in most other shooters, so it was sometimes a chore to do precision aiming. And since the enemies hit pretty accurately, and hard, it made for a pretty steep learning curve as you're quickly thrown into the thick of things from the start. There is some good weapon variety though, and getting into a rhythm in each relatively short level feels really good. And it's made all the better by the comic book style of the game accentuating impressive kill shots. Speaking of the style, the way it handles cutscenes was entirely unique at the time, with cel-shaded cinematics and voice acting mixed with comic book panels and cheesy on-screen sounds like a playable and brightly colored take on Sin City. The voice acting is pretty great too, featuring voices from David Duchovny, the late great Adam West,
Think your FBI paper pushers are a match for Sheridan's assassins, Amos?
and Eve, for those that remember who she is.
We'll incriminate all of them, from number 20 to number 1.
It does mix up the gameplay, with some cool stealth sections that show off the strengths of the game by focusing on the interactive environments and unique use of on-screen text to show enemy location. The story is admittedly pretty generic though, something about a man trying to recover his memories as he gets caught up in some hitman plot, so if you're not into the old school gameplay or unique style of the game, this story itself probably won't get you through it. This game is mostly style, I'll admit, but that's not a bad thing when you think about how generic most shooters are. I'll take a flawed but unique game over another generic okay one.
Welcome to Wario World!
This game is probably the biggest first-party title that no one played on this list, which is a shame, as it's one of the best platformers on the system. But it's also not terribly surprising. When I was a kid, I even managed to beat the game during a 3-day rental period from Blockbuster. Because yes, I'm an old man and remember a time before all the Blockbusters became mattress stores for some reason. But while the game is short, that doesn't make it any less good. The game is split up into 4 worlds, each with 2 large levels and a boss. This definitely doesn't sound like much content, and as I mentioned, it could be longer. But each level takes upwards of 30 to 40 minutes due to how much there is to collect, from magical sprites, to health upgrade statues, to Wario's trademark treasure, and more, so it's really just a matter of quality over quantity. The bosses are a lot of fun too, and really take advantage of all of Wario's increased arsenal from this game. Strangely, this one does away with the gameplay mechanics from the past entries in the series, which has admittedly never been that consistent anyway, but this entry doesn't really account for the loss of hats or transformations. Instead, it's more of a traditional platformer beat-em-up. But the beating is varied and still a lot of fun. To a limited extent, you can use enemies to complete certain puzzles, through either a spin attack or an epic pile driver, but other than that, it's just Wario's traditional punches, charges, and butt smashes to take out swarms of enemies. But the platforming is still satisfying, and it's broken up by regular portals that make use of the 3D space in cool ways that feel more like traditional Mario games in ways that Wario usually doesn't, which is kind of refreshing. I can almost guarantee this is the least played game on this list, especially given how unpopular role-playing games are in general on the Gamecube. But when I was a kid, this was a kind of refreshingly traditional RPG on the system, in a time when I didn't yet have a PS2 to fill that need. This game follows a group of treasure hunters with weird weapon names like Mag Launcher and Grenade, who explore ancient ruins to complete tasks for financial gain until a spoiled rich brat, who is very clearly the bad guy, gets in the way after he hears about a powerful artifact hidden in one of the ruins they explore.
Roses and women both begin to lose their beauty once they have blossomed. Wouldn't you agree, my dear? Don't you get it? A rose is most beautiful when it first begins to bud, and so it is with women. And with you.
Every time the party accepts a new mission, they choose a third party member from the ones in town and fly out to the next destination, which is procedurally generated each time, making every mission totally unique. This is a fun element, as these ruins are filled with treasure, but also enemies and traps, which can cause some major issues in battle if you hit one right before an enemy runs into you. Battles play out like most other RPGs, but the original mechanic for this one is based around the customizable weapons, where a majority of each character's skills come from. Depending on what you equip, your available abilities in battle change, and you have to use each weapon in order to gain new abilities. So sometimes it's necessary to take a hit to power in order to build up a weapon that might have really useful abilities your party needs in a certain dungeon. Different abilities also affect different squares on the combat grid, while others shift the location of enemies on the grid, so using these to your advantage can be the difference between a really easy battle or a struggle. As you progress through each randomized floor of the ruins and collect more treasure, you eventually reach the goal of the mission, which is usually punctuated by a boss creature, and then return whatever you find for a monetary reward you use to buy new equipment or upgrade and modify the weapons. This time between missions is also when all of this story plays out, which can last for a while and make the game feel a bit segmented between playing the game and just watching it. But the characters are fun and the visuals interesting, so if you can get past the sometimes cringy voice acting, these story sections are actually pretty interesting.
Linia's powers brought the dead flowers back to life. Her powers never cease to amaze me.
Oh, so that's why the flowers around the house are in bloom all year round.
Also, this game is notable for including one of my childhood gaming crushes, because just look at her. That's a pretty great character design, and she's also one of the strongest characters you can bring on missions, because the game knows most guys are going to take her along no matter what.
Just stick with me.
Nice.
I solemnly swear that I am up to no good.
There are so many adaptations of the Harry Potter movies, mostly due to different versions on different systems as the movies came out between console generations. But to me, there's a clear winner out of all of them. And it was the first one built specifically for this generation of consoles. I think a big part of why I enjoyed this game so much more than the others was that it expanded the gameplay without drastically changing the gameplay, unlike some of the later games that became co-op action shooters. This one is more about puzzles and platforming. It definitely takes its inspiration from games like Zelda, as you journey through areas solving puzzles in order to get new abilities in the form of spells, while also taking out enemies and even some surprisingly cool bosses. In between the adventure sections, though, is a fully realized and explorable Hogwarts castle for the first time. I attribute this to the fact that Prisoner of Azkaban was also the first movie that showed off more of the castle and its grounds, so this game was more open-ended to better adapt the movie, and it's a large part of why I love this game, even though a lot of people probably considered it just another licensed cash-in after the first two came out in varying levels of quality depending on the system. Aside from being able to freely explore Hogwarts and its grounds for the first time in a game, though, it also did some really cool things with the puzzle sections, as in many parts of the game you have to switch between the three main characters of Harry, Ron, and Hermione, and each one has their own special abilities you can take advantage of, such as Ron being able to find secrets in walls and use some trick items from his brothers, Hermione being able to crawl through small passages and use a wider range of magic,
I'll see if I can find the Glacier spellbook.
and Harry being able to do pretty much everything else because of course he can.
I solemnly swear that I am up to no good.
This makes for some really fun and sometimes surprisingly challenging platforming sections that make use of all of the party members. It's also worth noting that even though the movie voice cast didn't reprise their roles for this game, the sound-alikes employed instead sound really good for the most part.
Class dismissed.
Except Professor Snape. And I had to actually check IMDb to make sure it wasn't the movie actors. Also, Stephen Fry narrates the game, which is pretty great.
But finding himself back in the familiar dormitory, Harry felt he was home at last.
While the first two games in this series play pretty similarly on console, Prisoner of Azkaban gets a leg up for the extra effort put into making the world feel more open and realistic, as well as the improvements made to the gameplay, since a lot of licensed sequels just rest on the laurels of what came before it. But this one was actually the high point for this series. Before you start berating me in the comments about how this was the darkest period for Mortal Kombat games, let me defend it by saying I thought the games in this generation, including Deadly Alliance and especially Armageddon, are some of my favorites in the whole series because of the risks they took with the genre and the unique and fun extra modes, even if they weren't really necessary. Armageddon is actually my favorite due to the ridiculous amount of characters and just stuff in it. But sadly, while it's still in this generation of games, it missed the Gamecube and became the worst version of the game when it released on the Wii. So, Deception is the best Gamecube Mortal Kombat game due to that technicality. Anyway, this game is underrated for a lot of reasons, but the main one is that while the gameplay obviously doesn't hold up to the modern NetherRealm games, it's still a strong fighter with some really interesting mechanics, such as 3 different fighting styles for each character, and combos that actually shift between each style for some really impressive attack strings. It's also really satisfying to have dedicated weapons, rather than just a few moves that use a weapon for select characters. A lot of people also complain about the story mode, which admittedly is nothing special.
Shang Tsung, I will win the Mortal Kombat tournament and free Earthrealm from your tyranny.
But it is refreshing to actually have a mode like this rather than just the same arcade ladder that all the other games had up until this point. And it fleshes out a lot of the lore this series is known for, but rarely focuses on enough. Plus, it might look like garbage compared to the rest of the game, but it can be cool to actually run around freely, and it even has some secrets to uncover, as well as plenty of treasure and coins to collect to use in the crypt. You can also randomly punch people, which can have pretty hilarious results. Aside from the story mode and the traditional combat modes, this game also tosses in a few extras in the form of combat chess and puzzle combat. Combat chess isn't that great, but it does act as a unique take on traditional chess, while also still managing to be a fighting mode that can add challenging modifiers to the battles. Puzzle combat, however, is excellent, and a big part of why I love this game. It takes some notes from other competitive puzzle games like Tetris Attack, but adds in adorable versions of the characters that do equally adorable fatalities when you win. It's just so darn charming, you can't help but love it. Some of the new characters in this game are pretty forgettable, or just fill roles like the obvious Raiden replacement, and no sane person would try to convince an audience that the fighting in this game feels better than the more recent entries. But it's far from the disaster that a lot of people look back at it as, and the ways that it tries new things and added some fun modes outside of the traditional fighting modes to help pad out the content in a time before online competitive markets, really made it a bright light in a time when fighting games in general were struggling to innovate into the 3D space. This has always been a weird one to me. People absolutely love the Pokemon series and eat up every game released, even the spin-offs and cash-ins. The first console games released were the Stadium games on N64, and they were followed up by the spiritual successor on Gamecube called Pokemon Colosseum, which had the same kind of local battle modes as Stadium, but also introduced a story mode for the first time in a console Pokemon game, even if it wasn't quite the same as the mainline handheld games. Pokemon XD was technically a sequel to the story aspect of Colosseum, but just focused on the single-player campaign in a much larger way. And it was great! These days, everyone begs for a main Pokemon game on console, especially the Switch. But Pokemon XD is easily one of the worst-selling Pokemon games ever made, even though it's exactly a fully featured console Pokemon game. You control a new trainer and his first companion, in this case the adorable Eevee, and you're sent on a mission to stop an evil organization from doing whatever evil organizations do. In this case, you're stopping the spread of their evil shadow Pokemon using a new mechanic that literally steals the Pokemon away from the trainers, and over time cleanses them of their shadow disease. In every other Pokemon game, you're told all about how you're not allowed to catch Pokemon other trainers throw out, but in this game, it's literally the main way you improve your team. And it's really satisfying because I always feel like such a rebel going against the directions of every other game and totally pissing off the trainers who just stand there defenseless and alone. Am I a bad person? I think I might be a bad person. No time to dwell on that right now. Anyway, the battles in this game feel epic because they play out similar to the Stadium games in an era when the mainline games were still sprite art on the Game Boy Advance. But they're built into a proper narrative, so it feels less like just a 3D battle simulator. The story is actually pretty interesting too, with a lot of cool new characters, though the fact that everyone talks in the third person gets annoying really quickly, and seems like it could have been a very easy fix for the scripting process, but it's a minor nitpick in an otherwise great game, especially when people have been clamoring for a game just like this one for years. Not sure why more people didn't just play this game. Though I'll admit, I can't wait for a more traditional console game on the Switch soon without the shadow purifying gimmick watering it down and making it feel more like a spinoff. As always, let me know what you think of the first half of this list. And please, predict what you think is still to come. It'll be fun. The Gamecube was definitely a great underrated console with plenty of games to choose from. I probably could have easily managed more than 2 parts for this one, but I kinda like this whole top 14 thing now. Also, feel free to rip me apart for how my choices aren't really underrated. I have terrible opinions, blah blah.
Your hate sustains me. Feed me your negativity.
Sorry. Get a little carried away there. Not sure what came over me. Well, until next time when we cover the top 7, have fun. I said, stop poking me! What's going on here? What are you doing down there? Huh? Seems like we got caught in some kind of dual screen video bit. Except I got the short end of the stick because I'm down here with this poorly implemented touch gimmick. Well, your nonsense is affecting me too. We gotta sync up. That's how all this dual screen stuff works. So, sort it out down there or you'll ruin the whole video.